Let me introduce our insight for today. It's our very own commercial insurer. It's James McComish from McComish Insurance Brokers. So, James, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Well, last time I spoke a bit more about who I am, and so I'm just trying to start. There we go. Yeah, so last time I spoke a bit more about who I am, interest in sort of crystal spiritualism, and that type of thing. So I thought I'd go back to insurance a bit more this time. So if you've got extra caffeine, hopefully you won't need it. So we'll see how we go. But instead of saying boring everybody about terms and conditions and everything else, I thought I'd talk about claims because that's where obviously you need the insurance for. And to give a little bit background info in terms of claims and what the world of claims looks like, really. So I've done quite a bit of research trying to find some info for you, which interesting insurance companies don't like putting it out there. So we'll see. So I thought this hopefully be find a bit interesting. So I sort of basically did a Q&A bit really. So what was the value of all claims in the UK settled for in 2020? And interesting, it was 200 billion, apparently. And of those, how much were motor related? And it was only 12.5 billion of that. So it's still amazing numbers. And the location, I thought this was maybe around where Karis drove, but it wasn't. So it was so it's actually East London is what they're considered the most high risk area for actually driving, which where I lived in Mile End Road in Whitechapel for 3 years, I can quite easily understand that. Yeah, zebra crossings means something completely different there, I think, to everyone else. And then in terms of liability claims, so this employers' injuries, public and products liability, there were actually 163,000. And this was quite an interesting one. So in relation to domestic property claims relating to weather, most people seem to think that if there was a house claim, most people think it's going to be storm related, but actually only 17%. Most claims actually relate to escape of water, so tanks or theft and fire. So it's actually quite equally balanced. But you're saying you in the news, you only tend to hear about the sort of more storm claims, really. And in 2020, 79% of claims for domestic property were accepted, which means obviously 21% were repudiated. And the reason for that is a lot of people try and claim for wear and tear and that type of thing. So you have under all insurance policies a duty to maintain property and everything else. In terms of the other ones, travel, you tend to find where people, it's generally like past medical conditions where they haven't advised and that type of thing. Just on that one, as Ian probably can say, on private travel, you have a health declaration. If you have a corporate business travel, they don't tend to have that. It just has basically says do not travel against medical advice. So there is a difference. So if you can have a business travel policy, it is a little bit wider for you and can help you around certain things. And it was an largest ever claims as of 2021. So largest UK motor claim. This surprised me really. I thought it was going to be harder than this, but it's actually Rowan Atkinson wrote off his 1.2 million McLaren. So I thought, considering some of the supercars you've got out there, I thought it was going to be a lot more than that really, with Bugattis and everything else. But in terms of claims that in the world, which have cost the most, in 2008, the actual financial crisis cost 21 trillion. Hurricanes in 2,530 billion. Another financial one was 100 billion. The World Trade Center, for comparison, was only 40 billion. And there's been a lot of to do with obviously other natural disasters and wildfires as well. It just shows how much they can actually eat in. And the reason why that's relevant to the UK, even though all those are other than maybe financial crisis isn't, is in the UK, Lloyd's of London, which in sort of big building in middle of London, they underwrite most of the global risks. So what you tend to find is insurance companies will write cover up to a certain point, and what they will do is reinsure. So they will insure some of their risks. So say for a claim, they might only cover the first 5 million. The remainder of the claims picked up by Lloyd's syndicates in London. So it's actually the UK which will pick up, or the UK market which will pick up a lot of these claims. So that's how that influences sort of how we're so central to the world, really. One of the biggest issues is fraud. So in 2020, there was 96,000 fraudulent claims. And that represented over £1 billion. And interestingly, of that, 60% were actually motor related. So these were people basically claiming fraudulent injuries and that type of thing. And just a couple of weird examples on there. So apparently there was a travel claim, and when confronted, the guy actually ate his documents, which is a bit weird. Another one, somebody was claiming for a stolen Aston Martin car, and then he actually hit it a few hundred yards away, which was the most intelligent thing to do. And we see this one quite a bit, actually, where somebody claims for injury and everything, and then they can't resist on social media saying they're doing marathons. No, I haven't claimed, by the way. Doing marathons or weightlifting or everything else. So yeah, if it's quite amazing how many people do that, and we see that bit quite often. And you tend to find, particularly with employer's liability claims, you have 3 years from the date to make a claim. That's all data entry under Limitation Acts. So if somebody leaves an employer, quite often you sometimes find that guy then looking to make a claim within the 3-year period after they've left, because they feel there's no loyalty there. But then social media comes out and they've done all these other things. And we saw this type of thing happen a few years ago, where you have people were deliberately slamming their brakes on in front of HGVs and they're basically getting hit up the rear, and then they're putting in a claim for like 20,000 each for personal injury. And they say, oh, didn't you see that cat run across the road? So we had a few of those. And you tend to find as well in London, if you have a HGV going through London, I think it's probably cut out a bit now with all the emissions and things. People basically were getting things damaged, and they were trying to find a vehicle that they've seen, and because people don't realize they hit things with big vehicles, we get quite a few of those happen. And sort of similar with, yeah, you do get a few of those. And interestingly, we don't tend to see this too much. Brokers also fraudulent as well, and seeing there one guy apparently over made 18,000, obviously ended up going to jail and that sort of thing. Uninsured drivers. So in 2019, how many uninsured drivers do you think there were? There are actually about 1 million on the road at the moment. Which county was worse? I have no idea why West Yorkshire was, but apparently that's what so probably stay away from there. But this was quite harrowing statistic, really. What percentage, consider as 1 million uninsured and how many claims there are, 20% of all accidents relate to uninsured drivers. So that has obviously an impact on people. If somebody's uninsured, it's quite difficult, obviously, to then recover any costs to the insurer. You've got motor insurance bureaus and that, but that's why people sometimes get their bonus affected. If the insurance company can't recover from the third party, then it sort of can impact quite a bit. So just for what's in store for 2023, because insurance claims costs are rising dramatically. But why? Most of this is down to materials, and we all hear about inflation and everything else, but why really? And most of them one's down to timber, steel and labour. And the reason for that is in timber, half of EU timber imports come from Ukraine, Russia and Belarus. And obviously we've got issues with that. With steel, there's various tariffs and that they've put on, which have affected increase in there, and that's really down to this as well, which is Brexit. Apparently, we've lost 50,000 construction workers due to Brexit, and so obviously all that has an impact on everything. But be careful with your policies. Insurance company apply index linking, which is great, but they're not all the same. There's going to be like an ABI insurance related guidance. But one insurer yesterday was saying, oh, we only want to put 1% on, which they were 10% last year. So you just need to be careful, because I think there's going to be any underinsurance. And interestingly, just going back to the fraudulent claims, Aviva, this was going back years before mobile phones. Aviva actually got people to, as part of a big haulage fleet, they start giving people disposable cameras to take pictures of at the scene of the accidents, because one person actually took photos of everything, and what happened, the third party put in a claim for a driver and for passenger injuries. But when the photos were developed, it found there was only one driver, there was no passengers, and because of the photographic evidence, Aviva were able to kick out that claim completely. But without that photographic evidence, they would have been on for probably a good sort of 20,000 per person. So it saved them a good 100 grand on that claim for having that. So hence they decide that. So if you are involved in an incident, particularly if it's not if you are involved with fault claim, then take as many pictures as you can, because that can use an evidence to demonstrate your position as well in later on, because people do try it on a lot, really. So yeah, I thought it'd be a little bit different and might keep people's interest a bit more talking about insurance for change, really.
Well, James, for me, I loved that. You know, I love a statistic. So don't live in East London because your insurance is going to be too expensive.
Yep.
Mr. Bean drives a McLaren, or did.
Or not anymore. Yeah.
Oh. And yes.
Caroline's question, dash cams, it is something helpful. A lot, if you get 50-50 claim, if you got dash cam, then that can resolve 50-50s, because if you have an incident and there's no independent witnesses, then you've got one word against the other. And in the end, the insurance company has no choice but to go 50-50. By going 50-50, it's still considered part fault. So therefore would still affect your bonus and everything else. So if you have dash cams, then it can clear up, particularly if it's a heavy goods vehicle, because quite often people get impatient. They try to cut them up, undertake and all that side of thing. People get squashed and everything else. And it's so yes, it can be helpful. So yeah, sorry, interrupt.
That's all right, James. No, it's fine. And yes, for David, watch out in West Yorkshire, because there's a million, well, not a million uninsured drivers, but there are lots of uninsured drivers.
We live in Bradford, so I'm allowed to say it, but I have never driven, and I've driven all over the UK. I have never driven anywhere like Bradford. It's insane. People just pulling out.
A bit like wacky races.
Chaos, absolute chaos. Yeah.
Any other questions for James? Susie?
I've actually got one thing to get clarification on and a question. When I was a TUI rep a few years ago, this would affect from a travel point of view as well, Ian. As far as your travel insurance is concerned, we actually used to warn people that if they're going to take out quads when they're on holiday, to check their insurance policy, because sometimes they are classed as extreme sport.
Yes.
And therefore, if you have a problem, you're not actually covered. So if you ever think about taking out a quad, check your insurance on that first. And the question I've got, James, is you were saying, sorry?
Same with mopeds.
Oh, is it? Oh, I thought it was just, how are they extreme sport? That's a normal form of travel.
Yeah. Not on a travel insurance policy.
It is, you were saying about you kind of got a bit better cover, broader cover, if you do it as a business travel insurance.
Yep.
How do you define, I mean, for example, if we were doing a trip back to the UK,
yep,
I always put it down as it's business travel because I'll book in 1 or 2 meetings while I'm there. But okay, how can you define, how can you say this is business and not personal? Would you have to prove something?
Well, what we do so clients, so it's an annual travel policy as opposed to single trips when we do. What we use Aviva quite a lot for that side, because that tends to work a little bit better. But having said that, all of them tend to. There has to be more than 2 employees in a business. And then there's normally a condition that in terms of, well, with the travel policy, obviously it's there to cover travel trips, business trips, but the policies will automatically extend to cover domestic, personal, well, as in personal leisure travel for directors, but it has to be, normally there's within the wording, it sort of says more has to be business rather than pleasure, for example. So on there, so if you have a look at that, so they don't define, they have a travel pattern. You have to say, so you say how many trips you're going to be doing to different territories and how long and that sort of thing. And each one's a little bit different. So for example, some just work on number of trips and others work on actual every day you're away. And then it's a case of the premium is based on that, and then it's normally then quite wide, really. It's just a guesstimate, because obviously things change throughout the year, but that's what they work the premium on. But it's really just checking the wording on, in terms of, they obviously needs to be more business trips really over there rather than personal side. But no, the under personal, you do get the health declaration. You're aware that if you've got any previous conditions, you have to phone people up and then they either exclude or add additional premium on. But under a group travel policy for business, then it just says in the wording, providing you're not traveling against medical advice, then they tend to be happy. But within the wording for the business travel as well, they quite often include like driver, car, hire car, excesses cover and things like that. So the wording, the benefits are a little bit wider than what you would get individually. So, but obviously it only works really for a company. If it's just you individually, then yeah, it's not going to work for you really. So